Hey there, my name's Sam, and today I'm going to be talking to you about how AI tools can help you advocate for animals more effectively. But before I get into that, I want to talk a little bit about my personal story, what led me to animal advocacy, and why AI has been so pivotal in this journey. So, first of all, I've actually been involved in animal activism for over 14 years now. I made the change originally when I was 11 to 12 years old. So, I read a book called Man vs. Beast that described what happens to animals in factory farms. This was a fictional book that was about teenage spies infiltrating a supposedly radical animal rights group. So, that part obviously was fiction, but what was true is how one of the animal advocates described what happens to animals in factory farms. So I read that at 11 or 12 years old, and my first thought was that has to be part of the fiction of the book. There's no way we could actually be treating animals that badly. So I went online and I researched factory farming, and I found out that what the book had described was really just the tip of the iceberg in terms of how badly animals are treated in our society. So I stopped eating factory farmed animals at the time and later went vegetarian and then vegan a short while after that. But I was involved in animal advocacy from right from the beginning, essentially. However, my initial animal advocacy was not exactly the most effective. So I actually ran a radio show back when I was 11 to 12 years old. That's me in the top left there. And I had this show on a community radio station about animal rights issues. But because I was so angry about the way that animals were treated, I let a lot of that anger influence my style of communication. And as a result, my impact was nowhere near as large as it could have been. And especially when it came to people around me, nobody was really making any substantial changes to their lifestyle in terms of how it affected animals based on my outreach. So I started to realize that there must be a better way, right? So I looked into a lot of stuff around effective communications. So that meant looking into psychology, sociology, communication theory, marketing. And I started realizing that I didn't have to take these stabs in the dark about like what kind of communications I should use. There's actually a lot of research that's already been done on this. And so when I started reading that research and applying it to my interactions, they became so much more impactful and effective for animals. This eventually led me to working full-time with an organization called Vegan Outreach with a similar data-driven approach. So I spent 5 years working for them as their Australia and New Zealand outreach manager. So primarily my job was to go to university campuses and hand out leaflets about factory farming and talk to the students about these issues. I did that for 5 years, and every time that we implemented a data-driven strategy, I could immediately see the impact of it. For example, when I first started, we had these leaflets with a horrible cover of someone with a bowl cut eating a bowl of broccoli, but we looked at some of the data around what types of images were more effective in getting people to care about farmed animal issues. We found some research that showed that showing a farmed animal with a companion animal was highly effective. So we changed that leaflet cover over, and immediately I noticed that the take rate, like the percentage of people taking a leaflet from me, it more than doubled overnight from that one change. So making these data-driven decisions, I could see already by this point was hugely impactful in being more effective for animals. But eventually I realized that there was a scalability issue here with the kind of one-on-one approach in person. So in a single day, it might take me 8 to 10 hours to reach maybe 1,000 people with a leaflet about these issues, but I could then go home on Facebook, write up a post, and reach 10 times the amount of people for just a few minutes of effort. So I became very convinced that digital media was a really important avenue to be exploring. So I ended up going back to university. I got my degree in digital marketing, and I founded a digital marketing agency specifically for vegan businesses and animal rights charities. And again here, this really re-emphasized the importance of those data-driven decisions. We found all the time when we were running online ads, for example, is that the creative, the caption that you thought was going to perform the best often didn't. Often it was something entirely different that you wouldn't expect, and that by testing and looking at the data all the time, you would actually get to much better results than you could simply through theory alone. But ultimately, there's another scalability issue here as well. So The issue with the agency setting is that we could only take on so many clients. There's only so many that you can work with on a one-on-one basis. But what I realized by building software, and especially with artificial intelligence, is that we could help everybody who's an advocate for animals to be more effective in a way that didn't have those same sort of scalability limitations as the agency service-based model. So that led us towards creating VegCatalyst, which is the world's first vegan AI communications assistant, specifically for animal advocates, vegan businesses, and quite possibly for animal lawyers as well. So all of this is really summed up well by this quote that I love from Sherlock Holmes, which is, "It is a capital mistake to theorize before one has data." Now, AI has massively opened the doors to take this to a whole new level, because AI can comprehend so much more data than any human can on their own. So like I was saying earlier in that story, when I was looking at a lot of these studies myself and implementing their findings, that was definitely helping me be more effective. But there's such a limit on how much you can actually read, how much data you can take in. So I might have read like a couple of studies a week, but with VegCatalyst, we actually were able to train that on more than 45,000 different studies that are relevant to communications and advocacy. So you can imagine, as an individual human, be very, very difficult to read 45,000 studies, even if that was the only thing you dedicated your entire life towards. Now, you might be wondering, what actually is the relevance of any of this to animal law? Well, the way I see it, there's at least 4 areas where AI tools can really help animal lawyers to be more effective. The first way is through sentiment analysis. So a lot of what is being done in legal space is about understanding how the public is going to react to certain cases, to certain policies, to certain legislation, and we can do that at a much larger scale with machine learning. So these algorithms can look at huge amounts of text online and categorize them into how people were feeling emotionally about these different issues. So it gives us so much more data that we can then use to guide where we should be focusing our efforts. In a similar way, we can predict the success of different campaigns before they're actually implemented. With VegCatalyst, we've already built some predictive models that do things like predicting the number of social media comments, likes, and shares that a post will get before it's posted, and predicting the success of digital advertisements. But there's no reason that the same thing couldn't be applied to any kind of campaign. If you have data on, for example, a bunch of different legal documents, and then what the result of those documents were. You imagine if you had like tens of thousands of different trials, for example, where different arguments were used, you could use AI to predict the trends across which types of arguments resonate the most with which kinds of people, whether that's judges, juries, politicians, or just the public as a whole. This enables you to then tailor your arguments much more specifically to whoever it is you're communicating with. So you can use one AI to make those predictions, and you can feed those predictions into another AI that uses them to actually create the legal arguments or the campaign material. And finally, another way that I see AI as being extremely helpful for animal lawyers is through simulating debate. So AI chatbots especially are really good at taking on the persona of anyone or anything that you ask them to do. So you could set out the case for and against a specific issue, and you can get the AI to simulate and run through that debate. So this can be really helpful, first of all, for refining your own thinking and to really test how solid an idea actually is. And it can also be really helpful for preparing for possible objections that might come up in a case. So in all of these cases, the common theme here is that AI is able to help create better legal strategies and predict their success more effectively by applying those data-driven insights. So specifically with VegCatalyst, the way that this works is by merging custom instructions. So that means any instruction you give it, like for example, act as if you are a lawyer with this opinion, or act as if you are a judge trying to evaluate the merit of different legal arguments. It also looks at your user feedback. So when it gives you a response, you can upvote or downvote it. And that goes into training VegCatalyst to respond either that way or not that way. It also looks at vegan market insights, so marketing reports, different case studies and research papers, Again, the research library there is more than 45,000 different scientific studies relevant to animal issues. So it combines all of this information every time that you interact with it. So it's constantly learning off of new data and also your individual interactions. So that's where the technology is at the moment, but I think the potential of this technology in the near future is so much larger if we can address three barriers that are in the way currently of having a bigger impact. So the first thing we need to do is bridge the knowledge gaps. So at the moment, we have a lot of AI professionals who don't understand all the legal considerations, and we have a lot of legal professionals that don't know how to implement AI tools. So it's kind of like we have this river dividing us, and the more we can build a bridge to, be filling in that gap of knowledge both directions, the stronger we're going to be and the more effective our campaigns will be. So we also need to focus on building some specialized AI tools in this area. One thing that we've noticed a lot with building AI is that the more specific the task you're trying to solve is, and the more you train it on that kind of data, the better it's going to be. So generic AI that tries to do everything generally receives generic results, while specialized AI almost always delivers superior results. So we've already specialized a lot with VEG3 and focusing on animal advocacy, but I think if we focused even further and we had people starting to develop some tools that were specifically for animal law, the impact could be much greater. And finally, I think there needs to be more collecting and sharing of legal data. So one thing that comes across all the time with AI is that more data leads to much better predictions and much better results for your models. So if as a movement, the sort of animal law sector can build out more comprehensive data sets and make those open source to allow developers to train models on them, then ultimately that's going to create much more powerful AI models. But of course, it's not all sunshine and rainbows when it comes to AI for animal law. There's also some important ethical and legal considerations that we have to take into account when we're developing and or using these systems. The first is tackling bias in AI. So AI systems generally are biased by the data sets that they were trained on. So we see this a lot in large language models in particular, where they get trained on text all across the internet, much of which is racist, sexist, speciesist, and it then will often reflect those biases in its outputs. So that's something we really need to look at from the data set level, is how can we make sure that our data is less biased and train AI that are less biased. So this is part of what we're trying to do with VEG3, specifically tackling speciesism, is training our models on content that is in line with anti-speciesist values. The next important consideration is safeguarding data privacy. So because this is a very new technology, a lot of the regulations and legislations haven't fully been catered to address these specific concerns. So it's really important that when you're using an AI tool, you consider what the data privacy policy of that provider is, and make sure, especially when you're dealing with confidential data, that that data is going to be protected properly. Another legal consideration here is potential copyright violations. So at the moment, again, the way a lot of large language models are trained is indiscriminate scraping of the internet, and it's yet to be seen whether or not that will be considered a legal use of the copyright. There's some lawsuits currently in progress around that question, and there hasn't really been a legal precedent set there yet. And the final issue is hallucinations. And no, I'm not talking about eating too many mushrooms like I have in my icon here. What I'm actually talking about is a technical term in AI that means basically the AI making things up. So you see this again a lot in large language models because of the way that they were trained. The way a large language model is trained is to predict the next word or the next token in a series of words. So you can think of that in a simplified way as something like a more complex version of autocorrect on your phone, where you type some words and it predicts what you're going to say next. So when that creativity is something we're asking for, like if we ask the AI to write a rap about animal law, then we generally don't call this hallucinations, because even though it's never seen a rap about animal law, it can still actually create that and give you that response. But where it gets dangerous is when you're talking about case studies, legal precedents, and then the AI starts making up, case studies that don't exist, for example, or scientific studies that don't exist, and that then becomes a hallucination. So this is something that some lawyers have gotten in trouble with, where they've relied too heavily on these systems to generate their arguments, and they've ended up submitting documents to court, for example, where they have made up case studies in there. So all of these ethical and legal considerations are things that we consider and take very seriously at Veg3. We're developing systems that don't have the same species bias as traditional large language models. We safeguard data privacy by following the GDPR. So we're established in Europe with some of the strongest data privacy regulations in the world for that reason. Copyright violations, we actually only are training on opted-in user data, and we solve hallucinations by having that research library. But again, these are all very important ethical considerations to think about whenever you're evaluating an AI tool. So I hope that this has been helpful. Obviously, this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what's possible with AI. So for some further resources, one thing you can do if you want to try Veg3 specifically is try it out for free for a 10-day trial at veg3.ai. There's also a really great group called the Impactful Animal Advocacy Community, which you can find at impactfulanimals.org. They have a Slack group with some channels specifically about how AI can help animals, so I would really recommend joining those to anyone interested in learning more. And finally, if you want to contact me directly, whether that's you have an idea for a project you want to collaborate on, or you just want some advice about implementing AI into your workflows, feel free to reach out to me at sam@vegcatalyst.com. Thanks.